My daughter died in my arms, and Damian was celebrating her birthday. The steely resolve I once knew in Damian, the man I thought I loved, had melted into something saccharine, something sickeningly tender in that video. He held her hand, his gaze soft, a world away from the cold indifference he'd shown me for years. The contrast shattered something within me. After I jumped from the hospital roof, Lily's lifeless body clutched against my chest, I woke up. I was 23 again, on my birthday, the year I was supposed to marry Damian. It was my 23rd birthday when Damian first introduced Genevieve. "Eleanor," he said, his hand resting casually on my waist, "this is Genevieve. She's the granddaughter of Father Robert, from my family's old estate. Her parents passed away, and she's here studying. Quite alone, poor thing." In my past life, naive and trusting, I had welcomed Genevieve like a younger sister. I'd been genuinely moved by her orphan story. When she admired something in my room, a trinket, a scarf, anything that caught her eye, I'd press it into her hands, a gesture of sisterly generosity. Later, that same Genevieve, her face twisted with a venom I hadn't imagined possible, would spit at me. "Did you think you were being charitable? Your condescending pity just made me feel even more worthless. And do you know what I truly wanted? Damian. If you're so generous, why don't you just give him to me? Eleanor? Are you all right?" Damian's voice, soft, concerned, pulled me back to the present. His gaze was fixed on me, seemingly filled with affection, with me. How long had it been since Damian had looked at me with such warmth? A year? 2? He was wearing his favorite white shirt, the crisp fabric highlighting the sharp angles of his face, the starlight in his eyes. He was the kind of man who could steal a girl's heart, the stuff of teenage dreams, the Prince Charming every young woman fantasized about. Once, I had fallen completely under his spell. My entire youth had revolved around him. Marriage, a daughter, it had all seemed inevitable, the natural progression of our love story. But I hadn't foreseen the betrayal, the casual cruelty. While I nursed our sick child, he would be away, on business trips that conveniently coincided with Genevieve's presence in various cities. When Lily lay dying in the hospital, desperate for her father, he was with Genevieve. It was almost impossible to reconcile the cold, distant man who had become my husband with the tender young man before me. Our families were already deep into wedding preparations. But when had Damian's feelings for Genevieve begun to bloom? And why had he chosen to marry me in the first place? The questions swirled, unanswered. Perhaps, while I had been lost in the romantic illusion of love, his affection for me had already withered, leaving behind only pragmatic considerations. A strategic alliance, a merger of families, a step up the social ladder. Who cared about fidelity, about love, in the face of such calculated ambition? I gently disengaged my hand from his, a polite smile masking the turmoil within. "I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice even. "Please excuse me. I think I should go home." A ripple of unease spread through the room. This was his birthday party for me. The guest of honor leaving? And the grand finale, the culmination of the evening, was supposed to be his elaborate proposal. A digital banner, projected onto the tallest building in the city, was scheduled to illuminate the night sky with the words, "Eleanor, marry me." It was supposed to be romantic, extravagant, destined for social media virality. But romance felt like a cruel joke. Extravagance, a hollow mockery. With Lily's death still a raw wound in my soul, the world seemed drained of color, of joy. Genevieve cast a timid glance at me, then turned to Damian, her voice laced with faux innocence. "Brother Damian," she murmured, her eyes wide and seemingly sincere, "is it because of me? Am I making Eleanor uncomfortable? Perhaps I should leave. I know my background. I'm not worthy to be friends with someone like Eleanor." I looked at her, then at Damian. Let them have each other, I thought, a weary resignation washing over me. Damian held no allure for me anymore, only the bitter taste of ashes. Genevieve's arrival, it seemed, was merely the catalyst, the confirmation of what I already instinctively knew. My youthful dreams, my cherished fantasies, had been nothing more than illusions. Childhood sweethearts were no match for the allure of the newly arrived. Without another word, without a backward glance, I picked up my bag and left. I was done playing a role in their carefully constructed charade. I was going home. To start over. to finally live for myself. I barely reached my doorstep when Damian caught up with me, his hand gripping my arm, turning me to face him. "Eleanor, wait," he pleaded, his voice urgent. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought Genevieve. I know you dislike strangers, but Genevieve, she's alone here. No family. If I didn't include her, she'd be completely." "Let's break up," I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "What?" His eyes widened, disbelief etched on his face. "I don't love you anymore," I stated, the words ringing with a chilling finality, even to my own ears. "Why?" he pressed, his voice laced with panic. "Is there someone else? Have I done something wrong? Tell me, Eleanor. I'll change. I'll fix it." Those words. I remembered them. From my past life. After I had discovered his infidelity, after the tearful confrontations, the desperate pleas for him to return to me. Then, he had coldly shrugged off my hand, his jaw tight, his expression glacial. His answer then had been brutal, crushing: "I don't love you anymore. Nothing you do will change that." My father and stepmother emerged from the house, their faces etched with concern. "What's going on here?" my father demanded, his voice sharp. "We're breaking up," I announced, my voice clear and unwavering. "The wedding is off. Please cancel everything." My father's face flushed crimson. His hand lashed out, a stinging slap, across my cheek. 23 years old, he roared, his voice shaking with fury. "And you still speak like a fool, without thinking, without sense. Invitations have been sent. Cancel the wedding? Utterly disgraceful." My stepmother, Beatrice, stepped forward, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, quickly masked by a practiced expression of concern. "Now, Richard," she soothed, her voice saccharine sweet, "there's no need for violence. Whatever the children have done, hitting her won't solve anything. My own mother had died when I was young. Within a year, Beatrice, visibly pregnant, had taken her place. My childhood had been a lonely, shadowed existence. Damian had been my constant protector, my shield against the coldness of my own home. His presence had been a silent declaration: Eleanor was his future wife. Anyone who slighted me, who dared to be unkind, challenged the Lancaster family itself. Who wouldn't fall in love with a prince who wielded a sword in your defense? But those acts of chivalry, those childhood kindnesses, had become poisoned in retrospect. After his betrayal, they were no longer tokens of love, but sharp, agonizing reminders of what I had lost, of what had been stolen from me. Each memory, a fresh wound. "Uncle, Aunt," Damian interjected, his voice calm, measured, "please, let me speak with Eleanor alone." Adults always trusted Damian. He exuded an aura of competence, of control. We went upstairs, Damian following me into my bedroom. The moment the door closed behind us, he pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. His breath warm against my ear. "What is it, Eleanor? My love? What have I done to upset you?" he whispered, his voice a low murmur of concern. My own mother's early death had made me acutely sensitive, hyper-aware of unspoken emotions, of shifts in tone. One of my ears had been damaged by my father's violent outbursts when I was a child, leaving me partially deaf. For years, I had retreated into silence, withdrawn from the world. Many had assumed I was mute. Only Damian had possessed the patience, the gentle persistence, to coax me out of my shell, to draw me back into the world of sound and connection. Perhaps his gentleness had never truly vanished. Perhaps he hadn't changed at all. Perhaps he had simply redirected his love, his tenderness, towards another woman. "I'm not joking," I said, pulling away from his embrace, my voice firm, steady. "I'm serious about breaking up. I've been thinking about this for years." Years. Yes. Years since my pregnancy, years since his frequent business trips, the unanswered calls, the unreturned texts. Years since he had retreated into himself, erecting walls of silence and distance between us. Years since he had become a stranger in my own home. His sanctuary had become his study, the heavy door, a physical manifestation of his closed heart. Around that time, Genevieve's social media had begun to paint a subtle, yet damning picture. A university student, her location tags consistently mirrored Damian's business itineraries. Elegant meals, snapshots of exotic locales, and in the background, fleeting glimpses of a familiar watch, a distinctive cufflink. Subtle clues, whispers of betrayal that confirmed my deepest fears. Divorce had crossed my mind countless times. But I had hesitated, trapped by the weight of our shared history, the ghost of his past kindnesses. I couldn't bear to relinquish the memory of the man I had once loved. But the price of those sweet memories, the cost of clinging to a ghost, had been my very life. Now, fate, in its inexplicable wisdom, had granted me a second chance. I wouldn't squander it. His expression shifted again, deepening into profound disbelief, his eyes suddenly glistening with unshed tears. Not a performance. This was genuine pain. He stumbled back a step, his voice hoarse, cracking with emotion. So, all this time, he choked out, while I was eagerly planning our future, dreaming of our life together. You were thinking about leaving me? I met his gaze, my own eyes dry, weary. And all this time, while I was pouring my entire being into our marriage, into building a life with you, you were with another woman. Even when our daughter was dying, you didn't change. What have I meant to you all these years then? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Just a kind neighbor, an older brother figure? Was there ever any real love between us, any genuine romance? Damian, I sighed, the name a soft exhale of resignation. Don't pretend to be heartbroken. In our relationship, the one who has always been betrayed, always been wronged, is me. I'm just trying to cut my losses now, before it's too late. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision. Perhaps, I continued, my voice trembling, the Damian standing before me, the man I see now, truly does love me. But the price I'd have to pay for that love. It's too high. The man you will become, the changes you will undergo. I can't reconcile him with the man I see now. I wiped away a tear, a single drop tracing a cold path down my cheek. Heaven has granted me a second chance, Damian. And I won't waste it repeating the same mistakes. I don't want anything more to do with you. My family, my friends, everyone around me seemed to think I had lost my mind. Breaking off the engagement? Insanity. My father, enraged, struck me again, harder this time. He cut off all my credit cards, a clumsy attempt to force me back into submission through financial pressure. I moved out, packing only essentials. Thankfully, my grandparents, though long gone, had left me their old house. Stepping into the dilapidated building, I felt a surprising sense of homecoming. After my mother's death, my grandparents, grieving and heartbroken, had often taken me in. My father and stepmother, of course, had welcomed the respite from my presence. But when I was 6, my grandparents had passed away too, within months of each other. It wasn't until high school that I finally felt free enough to return to their house, to reclaim it as my own, a refuge from the coldness of my father's home. The old house was dimly lit, worn, but imbued with a quiet warmth, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I sat in silence, gazing at faded photographs, the faces of those who had loved me most, now just echoes in the stillness. My grandparents, my mother. All gone. Besides the house, my grandparents had left me a small inheritance. I went to the bank, then contacted the cemetery management. My mother was buried beside my grandparents. Next to them, a plot I had already purchased, intended, in my past life, for my own final resting place. Now, it would be Lily's. I bought a small white dress, tiny shoes, and a delicate silver bell, Lily's favorite toy. I placed them in the small coffin, a silent farewell. The cemetery staff looked at me with a strange mix of pity and curiosity, but said nothing. The headstone read simply, Lily, beloved daughter. No surname. Lily had been mine alone. After Lily's headstone was placed, I sat by her grave for the entire afternoon. This place held the remains of the 4 people I had loved most in this world. And they were all gone. When my mother died, I had thought I still had my father. But he had retreated into himself, then into Beatrice's arms. Soon, he was no longer my father, but Beatrice's husband, her child's father. Then there had been Damian. He had become everything to me, the most important person in my life. But he, too, had become a source of profound heartbreak, lifting me from the darkness only to plunge me into an even deeper abyss. Lily's acute leukemia had progressed with terrifying speed. Too young, barely 2 years old, her small body had endured relentless chemotherapy, her days filled with pain, her nights with inconsolable cries. Her cries had shattered my heart, mirroring my own silent weeping. My father, of course, had vanished from my life, dismissing me as a married daughter, no longer his concern. Damian had been perpetually absent, shuttling between cities with Genevieve. Damian's parents, cold and distant, had disapproved of their granddaughter from the start, and now, in her illness, they actively shunned any mention of her, unwilling to acknowledge her suffering. I had spent every waking moment with Lily, knowing her time was short, desperate to fill her remaining days with comfort, with love. But now, looking back, I realized it hadn't been me comforting her. It had been Lily comforting me. Her soft weight in my arms, her bright, trusting eyes, her tiny hand clutching mine, in that desolate world, she had been my only source of warmth, my only reason not to succumb to despair, not to leap from the highest building and end it all. And now, I was back. Back before Damian, before the wedding, before the heartbreak. Perhaps, heaven had heard my dying confession, my desperate plea for a second chance. That evening, Damian appeared at my doorstep. He looked gaunt, haunted, his eyes bloodshot, surrounded by a constellation of discarded cigarette butts on the pavement. He hadn't used to smoke. He had only started after we were married, a habit he'd carefully concealed from me, knowing I disliked the smell. "You've taken up smoking," I observed, the words escaping before I could stop them. "Always have," he replied, his voice raspy, raw. "Just didn't want you to smell it, so I kept it away from you." I nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Can we talk?" he asked, his gaze pleading. I nodded again, stepping aside to let him in. "I had a dream last night," he began, his eyes scanning the sparsely furnished room, his gaze lingering on the faint scent of incense I had lit to dispel the lingering mustiness of the old house. "I dreamt," he continued, his voice low, hesitant, "that we didn't break up. That we got married, like we were supposed to. That we were happy, at first. But then—" I finished the sentence for him, the words heavy with the weight of lived experience. "But then, soon after I got pregnant, you started seeing another woman. And then I gave birth to Lily, and even when my water broke, I had to call emergency services myself. And Lily got leukemia. And you visited her in the hospital. Once. And after she died, I jumped." He stared at me, his face ashen, his eyes wide with horror. "That was just a dream," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Did you have the same dream? Is that why you're breaking up with me, Eleanor? Please, believe me. I wouldn't betray you. Genevieve is just a lonely, vulnerable girl, like a sister to me. Our relationship is completely innocent." "That was your dream, Damian," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "Because in your dream, you were always fine. You were happy, carefree, living your life. But that dream, that was my life. My entire life. Damian, do you really think it was just a dream?" He grasped at straws, desperate to deny the truth staring him in the face. "Eleanor, I don't understand why I suddenly became that man in your dream. It's like I was possessed. Bewitched. But I love you, Eleanor. I only love you. 15 years, Eleanor, 15 years we've been together. That kind of love doesn't just vanish. The man in your dream. He wasn't me. He just wore my face." I began to laugh, a hollow, broken sound, tears streaming down my face. 15 years. Gone. Just like that. The man who had betrayed me, the cold, indifferent husband, he just wore Damian's face. From the beginning, the boy I had loved, the boy who had loved me, had died somewhere along the way, perhaps when he turned 18, perhaps when he turned 21. Only I had been too blind, too naive to see it, clinging to the illusion that he still existed, that a gentle breeze ruffling his white shirt, a warm smile in his eyes, was enough to keep him alive. But when had he truly died? When had the change begun, so subtle, so insidious, that I hadn't even noticed the moment of his passing? Perhaps there had been signs. His work had become all-consuming, his social life a whirlwind of endless obligations. Late nights, business dinners, always returning home reeking of smoke and alcohol. My own life, in contrast, had become quiet, predictable. After we married, I had taken a stable, undemanding job in the civil service. My quiet, predictable life, my simple dreams, my unshakable loyalty, they were no longer enough for him. My steady, grounded existence, my lack of ambition, had become a source of quiet contempt. He no longer shared his world with me. Our conversations dwindled to polite exchanges, empty pleasantries. The initial sweetness of marriage had curdled into a dull ache of boredom and routine. Any excuse to leave, a ringing phone, a fabricated meeting, and he would be out the door, leaving me alone in the silence. I had tried, desperately, to bridge the growing chasm between us, to share my world, my interests, the small joys that still flickered in my life. He had initially feigned interest, a polite listener, but his attention would quickly drift, his gaze unfocused. When had we stopped talking? What had we even talked about, in those early days of love? Our families, our studies, movies, books, weekend getaways, dreams of the future. My laughter, my stories, my endless chatter. And his quiet presence, his gentle gaze, filled with unwavering attention, unwavering love. But the future had arrived, and it was nothing like the dreams we had shared. He had retreated into silence, leaving me alone, lost in a world of unspoken anxieties, of unanswered questions. He was bored. I was a burden. His friends changed, his excuses for late nights became increasingly elaborate, increasingly transparent. And then, the nights he didn't come home at all. After my pregnancy, one weekend, when he claimed to be working late, I decided to surprise him. To bring him dinner at his office. A scene straight out of my teenage fantasies. Me, delivering a homemade meal to my hard-working husband, keeping him company during his long hours, a shared moment of quiet intimacy before returning home together. Many complain about the agonizing wait of time. But I had always believed that waiting for someone you loved, the anticipation of their return, was a kind of happiness in itself. Through the glass wall of his office, I saw Genevieve. Dressed in white, her hair cascading down her back, she sat on his lap. He was feeding her, spoonful by spoonful, his touch gentle, possessive, his gaze fixed on her with a tenderness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She looked fragile, ethereal, almost childlike in her vulnerability. That day, my world shattered. I met a stranger in the mirror, a woman consumed by a rage I didn't recognize, a woman capable of a terrifying, destructive fury. And I saw the true Damian, a man of ice, of steel, utterly devoid of compassion. I had fallen to the floor, a sharp pain tearing through me. Blood. But Lily, miraculously, was unharmed. After that day, Genevieve and Damian no longer bothered with pretense. Their affair, once whispered in hushed tones, became an open secret, a casual acknowledgement within our social circle. Eleanor, he had said, his voice dismissive, almost condescending, look around our world. Every man in our circle has affairs. Your father, my father. It's just the way things are. What does it matter? Our relationship, our bond, is still there. What good does it do you to make a scene? Do you even have a home to go back to? If you leave me, who would take you? Who can guarantee they'll be faithful? I know you dislike social events, but I need someone by my side, someone who understands. Then, the endless cycle began. Thoughts of divorce, countered by the phantom weight of his past kindnesses. During high school, while juggling internships and academic competitions, he had still found time to help me with my homework. In university, when a severe fever left me delirious in my grandparents' empty house during winter break, he had broken down the door, carried me to the hospital, stayed by my side through the night. My father's anger, Beatrice's scorn, he had always been there, my protector, my shield. I couldn't let go. I clung to the belief that relationships were never easy, that rough patches were inevitable. That in the long journey of life, someone might stray, might lose their way. But a true partner should be patient, understanding, should wait, should guide them back. People said that those who had difficult childhoods were more pragmatic in love, more cautious entering relationships. I had been cautious. But once I had fallen, once I had allowed myself to love him, his smallest kindnesses had been enough to melt the ice around my heart. And there had been so much more than just small kindnesses. Years of companionship, years of care, years of devotion. I would wait. I would be patient. I would believe that he would come back to me, eventually. Instead, I waited for nights that stretched into empty days, for a man who never came home. I waited for a love that had died, replaced by silence, by distance, by betrayal. I waited, alone, cradling Lily in my arms, weeping until I was numb. Then, the final, brutal truth. "You haven't done anything wrong, Eleanor," he had said, his voice flat, indifferent. "It's just that our paths are diverging. You're standing still, Eleanor. But I'm embracing a new world. You can't keep up." I was afraid of heights. But standing on that hospital rooftop, Lily's fragile body in my arms, I felt a profound sense of liberation. No more sleepless nights, no more heart-wrenching pain, no more waiting for a man who would never return. "But it's too late," I said, my voice soft, final. "The moment Lily died, Damian, we were over. Completely, irrevocably over." I looked at him, my gaze unwavering. "Do you even know her name was Lily? Do you even know her name was Xian Xian in Chinese?" He was weeping openly now, his face contorted with grief, with remorse. "Give me another chance, Eleanor," he begged, his voice thick with tears. "I don't understand why I changed. I loved you so much. My love for you was real, Eleanor. Please, I know I've made mistakes, but I realize it now. I truly do." How ironic. In my past life, how desperately I had longed for this moment, for him to break down, to confess, to beg for forgiveness, for a chance to rebuild what we had lost. But now, as he stood before me, broken, contrite, I felt nothing. The man I had loved, the boy of my dreams, was truly gone, lost in some forgotten corner of time. My decision to break off the engagement had created a scandal. My father, humiliated, had banished me from his home. Friends, acquaintances, everyone I knew, bombarded me with questions, desperate for answers. Damian, the perfect boyfriend, the epitome of devotion, and we were suddenly, inexplicably, over? The mystery was irresistible. I ignored them all. Damian, however, persisted. He came to my grandparents' old house almost daily, leaving packages of groceries, toiletries, small tokens of his presence on my doorstep. He would sit on the steps outside, silent, watchful, then vanish after a while, leaving only the lingering scent of his presence in the cold air. The gifts he left were always discarded, tossed into the trash the next morning. One day, watching him walk away from my balcony, I noticed how his shoulders had slumped, how his once confident stride had faltered. He looked older, wearier, the carefree youthfulness of his past replaced by something somber, something broken. I applied to graduate school, accepted at a university in City B. The day before I left, I went to the cemetery. At Lily's grave, nestled amongst the flowers, a small bouquet of daisies lay nestled against the headstone. I sat beside them, basking in the afternoon sun, a quiet communion with the past. The cemetery was peaceful, surrounded by whispering trees, the sky a vast, cloudless blue. A sense of emptiness, of quiet resignation, settled over me. "Grandma, Grandpa, Mom, Lily," I murmured, my voice soft, barely audible. "I'm leaving for City B tomorrow. I probably won't be back often. Rest in peace here. Don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself. I won't do anything foolish again." Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the sunlight. And I won't go back to Dad's house either. Or contact Damian again. He might have been good to me once. But holding on to hate is exhausting. And revenge? What would be the point? He was kind to me, once. And he hurt me, deeply. Perhaps we're even now. "Lily," I whispered, addressing my daughter, her name a soft sigh on the breeze. "Great-grandparents, Grandma, they're all here with you. You're not alone. Don't be scared. Mommy's going to start a new life now." I sat there for a long time, lost in thought, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Then, through the golden light, I saw him. Damian, walking towards me, up the stone path, step by slow step. In his hand, he carried a bouquet of daisies. He placed them gently at the foot of Lily's headstone. Too late, I thought, a bitter ache in my chest. You didn't cherish us when we were alive. Why come now, to a grave? No. In my past life, the Damian I had known then, the man he had become, wouldn't have shed a single tear, even if both Lily and I had ceased to exist. A fresh wave of anger surged through me. Why had I wasted so many years on him? Why had I believed his empty promises, his vows of eternal love, only to be wounded so deeply, so irrevocably? In your dream, I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the stillness, you never once held Lily. You only visited her once, when she was dying. Is this bouquet, is this some pathetic attempt to alleviate your guilt? A bitter smile twisted my lips. Don't bother, Damian. Back then, you were incapable of guilt. You were probably relieved. Relieved that my daughter and I would no longer be a burden to you. His face was ashen, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. He reached out, his hand trembling, and took mine. Eleanor, I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice raw with anguish. So sorry. I wrenched my hand away. But he pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me, holding me tight, a desperate, clinging embrace. Eleanor, please, give me another chance, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I'll be a good husband this time. I'll be a good father. Please, believe me. I understand now. I know what I've done wrong. I'm consumed by regret, Eleanor, consumed by it. No, it was in the dream, when I heard about you. Jumping. I was consumed by regret. I begged heaven to give me another chance. And now I'm begging you. Eleanor, give me another chance. I swear, I know what I did wrong. This time, I'll be a good husband, a good father. Seeing my face, my unwavering resolve, he sank to his knees, still clinging to my waist, burying his face against my stomach, his body shaking with sobs. I truly understand now. Please, don't shut me out. Don't leave me, Eleanor. I can't live without you. I don't know how to live my life without you, he continued, his voice muffled against my clothes. My joy, my sorrow, my successes, my failures, what is the point of any of it, if I don't have you to share it with? Eleanor, we promised each other a home, a life free of betrayal, of fighting, of cold silences. Only warmth, only love. I'll give you that, Eleanor. I swear, I will. Everything you've ever wanted, everything you've ever missed, I'll give it to you. Eleanor, please, just one more chance. I truly understand now. I know I was wrong. The day after our engagement, he had brought me to this cemetery, to this very spot. He had sworn to me, to my mother, to my grandparents, to build us a perfect home, a perfect life. He had described his vision of happiness, waking together, leaving for work together, a kiss goodbye, then, in the evenings, whoever returned home first would prepare a warm meal, waiting for the other. He had promised to hold me close, even when we argued, to never let anger fester in the silence of the night. He had envisioned a family photo album, filled with memories, with milestones, a tangible record of our love, a love bank to draw upon in times of conflict, a reminder to forgive, to cherish. Weekends spent hand-in-hand grocery shopping, cooking together, movie nights, walks in the park with our imaginary dog, a golden retriever named Fluff. Vows, promises, dreams. Not meant to be kept, but broken. Even if you die, I said, my voice cold, devoid of emotion, I will never give you another chance. Everything you ever gave me, every kindness, every act of love, you've already taken back, with interest. From this day forward, I want you to leave me alone. Don't ever come near me again. Turning away, I walked out of the cemetery, leaving him kneeling by Lily's grave. I glanced back once. He was still there, a broken statue, his gaze empty, lost, fixed on some distant, invisible point. Perhaps, that was how I had looked, felt, during those countless nights I had waited for him, for a love that had already died. Later, in the sterile silence of the hospital, in the ghostly shadows of the night ward, in the endless ring of his unanswered phone, my soul had shattered, piece by silent piece, until there was nothing left to break. Returning to university felt like stepping back into a distant, almost dreamlike past. I adapted to my new life quickly, finding solace in routine, classes, the library, devouring the reading lists, and occasionally indulging in light-hearted entertainment, variety shows, dramas. I had also completely severed ties with my old life, canceling my previous phone number, closing my bank accounts. It was as if, in the tapestry of my former existence, I had never truly existed. My memories, too, began to fade, the faces and names of those people blurring at the edges of my mind. Now, my world was filled with new faces, new experiences, a new beginning. I had time, vast stretches of it, and I immersed myself in reading, in learning. The world of literature became my sanctuary, a refuge from the harsh realities of life. No matter how scarred or broken one might be by the world, the mountains and rivers of literature always offered a path back to inner peace. The new year arrived, blanketing City B in a soft, silent snowfall. I wandered through the campus, the silver-clad world hushed and serene, a tranquility that had been so elusive in my past life. New Year's had always been a time of unease. At my father's house, I had felt like an unwanted guest, my stepmother's smiles brittle and distant, my father and half-brother a world apart, their intimacy a painful exclusion. Married to Damian, New Year's meant navigating the endless social obligations of his family, the tiring charade of polite exchanges and forced smiles. As our relationship deteriorated, even the pretense of affection became unbearable, each forced interaction amplifying my inner turmoil. I had always been acutely aware of others' perceptions, constantly self-conscious, embarrassed by my own existence. Now, I finally understood. No matter how hard I tried, those who disliked me would never change their minds. And those who had truly loved me, they were all at rest, beneath the earth. I sought refuge in the only campus eatery that remained open during the holiday, ordering fried rice and lamb skewers, intending to take them back to my dorm. But on the way, I bumped into Professor Ainsworth, a kind, elderly professor in the literature department, well into her 70s, brought back from retirement for her invaluable expertise. Seeing I was alone on campus during the holiday, she insisted I join her family for New Year's Eve dinner. Despite my polite refusals, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Reluctantly, I agreed, unable to refuse her genuine warmth. Her home was filled with the comforting scent of old books and simmering spices. Just Professor Ainsworth and her husband, Professor Zhou. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, interspersed with elegant Chinese calligraphy and paintings. Professor Zhou, a jovial man with twinkling eyes, was happily bustling around the kitchen, stirring pots and pans. The dining table was set for 3. I offered to help, and the professors, dispensing with formality, asked me to wash the fruit. I braced myself for the inevitable questions about why I wasn't home for the holidays, but they asked nothing, thankfully. Professor Ainsworth inquired about my reading progress, and Professor Zhou chimed in, and soon they were engaged in a lively discussion about a particular literary work, their vast knowledge humbling me. Professor, I said, genuinely impressed, I hope to pursue a doctorate and become a university professor myself, someday. Professor Ainsworth smiled warmly. Of course, you can, Eleanor. You have a gift for scholarship. You're well suited to academia. But remember, scholarship demands solitude, a willingness to embrace quiet contemplation. Think carefully. Solitude? If I could, I would retreat to a remote mountain monastery. Solitude held no fear for me. In graduate studies, I felt I had finally found my purpose, a path that resonated with my soul, independent of any external validation, any expectation. It was simply, profoundly, mine. As I helped set the table, Professor Ainsworth chuckled and made a phone call, asking someone when they would be home. Turning to me, she explained, that was my youngest son. He's on his way. We'll wait for him before we eat. Professor Ainsworth had 2 sons, one living abroad, the other here in City B. We settled into the living room, watching a muted television program, waiting for her son to arrive. When the door finally opened, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Professor Ainsworth's son was strikingly handsome, with an air of quiet intelligence, a gentle refinement. But it wasn't his appearance that shocked me. It was his face. It was Dr. Zhou Mubai, Lily's oncologist. Seeing him, a wave of grief washed over me, a tidal surge of memories. He had been a constant presence during Lily's illness, a witness to my deepest pain. Seeing him now, I was instantly transported back to the sterile white walls of the hospital, to Lily's fragile smile, to the unbearable ache of loss. Discreetly, I excused myself, rushing to their bathroom, battling the sudden, overwhelming urge to weep. I fought back the rising tide of tears, but they still escaped, hot and stinging. When I finally managed to regain control, my reflection in the mirror stared back, eyes red-rimmed, swollen with unshed grief. When I returned to the living room, the professors acted as if nothing had happened, warmly inviting me to sit down for dinner, smoothly shifting the conversation to other topics. Their New Year's Eve dinner was warm, intimate, filled with gentle laughter. Professor Ainsworth's eldest son, his wife, and their children joined via video call from overseas, their faces filling the laptop screen, adding to the festive atmosphere. I remained mostly silent throughout the meal, picking at my food, my emotions a turbulent undercurrent beneath a veneer of composure. Stealing a moment when I raised my bowl to my lips, I hid my face behind it, allowing the tears to fall silently, unnoticed. After dinner, Professor Ainsworth insisted her son drive me back to campus. Outside, the evening air was crisp, the streetlights casting a soft, amber glow. We walked slowly, side by side, in comfortable silence. As we reached the university gates, I noticed a familiar figure standing in the snow-covered landscape. Against the white expanse, his black coat stood out starkly, snowflakes dusting his shoulders. Damian. I stopped, a jolt of surprise running through me. What was he doing here? Zhou Mubai followed my gaze, then turned to me, a question in his eyes. Thank you, I murmured to him, my voice soft. A thank you not just for the ride home, but for so much more, for his gentle care. Of Lily, for his quiet compassion during those darkest days. Lily had spent more time with Dr. Zhou than with her own father. She barely remembered Damian's face, but Dr. Zhou, she had adored. She had even declared, with childlike certainty, that she would marry him when she grew up. I was grateful for his kindness, for the extra care he had shown Lily, beyond the call of duty. You're welcome, he replied, his voice low, tinged with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a shared sadness. Damian saw us then, his gaze shifting from me to Zhou Mubai, a sharp, assessing look. He seemed to be scrutinizing him, measuring him. Zhou Mubai, ignoring Damian completely, turned back to me. Let's go, he said gently. The paths are icy. I'll walk you to your dorm. I nodded, grateful for his quiet support. Eleanor, Damian called out, his voice strained, pleading. It's New Year's Eve. I came to be with you. The Damian I had once loved, the Damian before betrayal, would have worried about me being alone, would have braved any obstacle to be by my side. But time had eroded everything. The love, the devotion, all faded, leaving behind only resentment and regret. Men's hearts, I realized, could change so quickly, so completely. I frowned, a flicker of annoyance surfacing. Don't come here, I said, my voice cold, dismissive. I don't want any memories of you here. City. B University, my new life, it was all a fresh start, a clean slate. I wanted no trace of the past, no echoes of pain, no reminders of him. He froze, his body rigid, his face a mask of wounded disbelief. He had probably never imagined that the girl who had once been so utterly dependent on him could become so utterly indifferent, so openly hostile. In his privileged life, no one had ever dared to reject him so completely. And, I added, my voice steady, calm, this is my boyfriend. Please don't bother me again. If you do, I will call the police. Zhou Mubai placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, a silent affirmation of my words. Damian visibly recoiled, as if struck. Zhou Mubai and I walked into the campus, leaving Damian standing alone in the snow. Thank you again, I said to Zhou Mubai at the entrance to my dorm. It's nothing, he replied, his voice gentle. If he bothers you again, call me. He took out his phone, and we exchanged contact information. Back in my dorm room, I switched on the lights and looked out the window. Zhou Mubai was still standing there, in the same spot, head bowed, lost in thought. After a while, he looked up, his gaze briefly lifting to my window, before he slowly walked away, disappearing into the winter night. For the next few days, I stayed in my dorm, cocooned in my blankets, lost in the pages of books, eating instant noodles and bread when hunger gnawed. The new semester began, and I threw myself into academic writing, attempting to craft scholarly papers, to contribute to the world of literary discourse. It was challenging, demanding, but profoundly fulfilling. A quiet joy, a sense of purpose that had been absent for so long. Days were spent immersed in research, poring over books, wrestling with complex ideas, each small breakthrough bringing a quiet sense of satisfaction. One night, as I drifted to sleep, a question surfaced in my mind. There's someone I used to know. But the name, the face, remained elusive, lost in the fog of forgotten memories. A sense of peace washed over me. I released the thought, letting it drift away, and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. My next encounter with Jomubai was in a hospital ward. Professor Ainsworth had collapsed during class, and we had rushed her to the emergency room. Jomubai had arrived quickly, a reassuring presence amidst the flurry of medical activity. I had assumed he would be in City S by now, pursuing his career at the prestigious hospital there. But he was still here. Shortly after Professor Ainsworth's recovery, I received a call from him. The cherry blossoms at Yuyuan were in full bloom, he said, his voice gentle. Would I like to see them with him? Hesitantly, I agreed. I had seen news articles about Damian. His company had opened a branch in City B. His car was often parked near the university gates. Photos of him standing by his car, gazing at the campus, had circulated on online forums. His wealth, his good looks, his expensive car, he still attracted attention. But it was all irrelevant to me now. Not long after our cherry blossom outing, Jomubai asked me to be his girlfriend. I accepted. I didn't know how much love my weary heart could still hold, but I needed to move forward, to embrace life again. And I chose to trust Jomubai. His past kindness to Lily, his boundless patience and compassion, were a quiet testament to his character. When we appeared, hand in hand, in Damian's line of sight, his reaction was visceral. His eyes seemed to flinch, as if from a sudden, blinding light. He inhaled sharply on his cigarette, then turned and drove away, disappearing into the traffic. Genevieve found me as I was leaving the library, heading for lunch. Damian had been in a car accident, she said, her voice strained. He was awake, but unresponsive, refusing to speak. She begged me to visit him, to try to reach him. I looked at the girl standing before me, a cold disdain rising within me. Spare me the theatrics, I said, my voice sharp. Go back and tell him, even if he dies, I won't spare him a glance. Genevieve's face contorted with anger. I don't understand, she spat, her voice laced with venom. How could Damian ever have loved such a heartless woman? Oh? I countered, a sardonic smile playing on my lips. And have you finally secured your place as Mrs. Lancaster? Her face paled, her jaw tightening. Without another word, she turned and stalked away. My father found me soon after, his face flushed with anger. He began with loud recriminations, berating my filial impiety, then shifted to wheedling persuasion, urging me to reconcile with Damian. The Lancaster family, he explained, had only one heir, Damian. His two elder sisters were married off. Damian would inherit everything. This was the central theme of his visit, his primary concern after nearly a year of silence. I'm already married, I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. My father's eyes widened in disbelief, his hand rising again, the familiar sting of a slap across my face. Divorce him, he roared. Immediately. And not a word of this to anyone. I was stunned by his blatant control, his unwavering assumption that I would bend to his will, that my life was his to dictate. Very well, I said, my voice even. He visibly relaxed, a sigh of relief escaping him. The company is facing financial difficulties, he confessed, his voice softening, a hint of desperation creeping in. Construction projects are stalled. If you marry Damian, I can finally ask his family for financial assistance. I offered a faint, mirthless smile. Jomubai emerged, changed and ready for lunch. He had seen my father's arrival, had waited discreetly in his office. As he approached, I showed him my phone, his message blinking on the screen. Tonight, I'm making sweet and sour pork ribs. Seeing me, he smiled, a genuine warmth lighting his face, and leaned in to kiss me. In the car, I took out a small velvet box, a ring nestled inside, purchased just that morning. He paused, a question in his eyes. I thought, shouldn't this be my role? Is this a rejection? I teased, a playful lilt in my voice. No, he chuckled, his eyes sparkling. A pleasant surprise. That night, I didn't return to my dorm. The next day, we went to the marriage registry, and officially became husband and wife. He helped me pack the rest of my belongings from the university, and I moved into his apartment. We spent the day laughing, talking, basking in the simple joy of new beginnings, the quiet thrill of newlyweds. Jo Mubai's parents were overjoyed. After some discussion, they decided on a small, intimate wedding. Large, extravagant affairs, they agreed, were too stressful, too impersonal. Occasionally, we would stay at Professor Ainsworth's house. In Jo Mubai's childhood bedroom, amidst a collection of old photographs, I stumbled upon a picture of us together. We knew each other before? I asked, incredulous, holding up the faded photograph. It was me, unmistakably, looking much younger, perhaps in high school. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder, gazing at the photograph with a soft smile. Every time we met, he murmured, his voice low, intimate, "You were crying. Always a little crybaby." No wonder he'd sighed that day. He'd recognized me instantly. He turned me to face him, cupping my face in his hands, his gaze tender, unwavering. "Your past life," he said, his voice gentle, "I wasn't part of it. But your future, Eleanor. Your future is all mine." A wife's tears, he continued, a playful seriousness in his tone, "are a husband's failure, Mrs. Zhou. And I have no intention of being a failure." I smiled, leaning in to kiss the corner of his lips. A wife's tears are a husband's failure. A daughter's tears, then a father's failure too. The summer after high school graduation, a fight with my father over my choice of university major had escalated, ending, as always, with his violence. Since childhood, I had witnessed his anger, his brutality. I remembered the time he had struck my mother, and when I, a small child, had tried to shield her, his hand had lashed out, leaving me partially deaf. Driven by years of pent-up resentment, I had run away from home. Damian had been in France at the time, and in a moment of impulsive desperation, I had decided to go to him. But I had lost my phone, my wallet. Lost and alone in a foreign country, unable to speak the language, I had panicked. Seeking help, I had encountered a Chinese man. Jo Mubai. He had helped me navigate the airport bureaucracy, assisted me with filing a police report. My passport had been recovered from a trash bin, but my money and phone were gone. Everything, contacts, information. My entire digital life was trapped within that lost phone. I couldn't even recall any phone numbers, social media logins useless without phone verification. My world had seemed to collapse around me. Trusting instinct, trusting his kind eyes, his gentle demeanor, I had confided in Jo Mubai. He didn't seem like a threat. His quiet demeanor, his gentle kindness, even his physical presence, his calm aura, were oddly similar to Damian's. Without hesitation, I had placed my trust in him. He had taken me to a hotel, paid for my room, given me some cash. He had promised to help me find Damian the next day. The following morning, he and a friend had planned to drive me to Damian. At breakfast, we had sat together, side by side. That photograph, the one I now held in my hand, must have been taken then, a candid snapshot captured by his friend. Lost in my own turmoil, overwhelmed by the loss of my phone, I had been numb, oblivious to everything around me. Even Jo Mubai's face, his features, had faded from my memory. Years had passed, and the details had blurred, lost to time. I had completely forgotten that we had ever met. And yet, fate, in its intricate and mysterious design, had brought us together again. At my father's persistent urging, I finally visited Damian in the hospital. Jo Mubai accompanied me. Damian looked gaunt, drawn, his arm in a cast, a neck brace supporting his head. My father sat stiffly on the sofa, while Genevieve hovered nearby, a picture of devoted servitude, attempting to coax Damian to drink something, offering him spoonful after spoonful of bland soup. Damian, his patience frayed, abruptly knocked the bowl away, the soup splattering across Genevieve's white dress, a visible stain marring her pristine image. His mother, her voice sharp with irritation, immediately turned on Genevieve. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "If he doesn't want it, don't force him. You can't even do one simple thing right." Soup dripped down Genevieve's dress, leaving her looking flustered and humiliated, tears welling in her eyes. In my past life, Damian would have rushed to her defense, cradling her in his arms, offering comfort. Now, he simply averted his gaze, a look of cold disdain in his eyes. His parents, seeing me, erupted in effusive greetings, their warmth a stark contrast to the cold indifference they had shown me after Lily's birth. Their welcome was effusive, almost desperate. Then, they noticed Zhou Mubai standing behind me, and their smiles faltered, their expressions shifting to something guarded. Damian's eyes lit up when he saw me, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice strained, subdued. I nodded, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. Zhou Mubai stepped forward, extending a hand to Damian's parents, his demeanor polite, composed. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm, steady. "I'm Eleanor's husband, Zhou Mubai. And I'm also a doctor here at this hospital." He was off duty, dressed in casual clothes, his presence radiating quiet confidence. A stunned silence descended upon the room. My father stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. I reached into my bag and handed a wedding invitation to Damian. I said, my voice even, "You should have one." Damian's hand, encased in plaster, remained immobile. His other hand, the one not in a cast, trembled, his knuckles white, as if weighed down by an invisible burden. Then, the storm broke. Damian's mother launched into a tirade, accusing me of heartlessness, of cruelty, of abandoning a man who had sacrificed so much for me. She lamented my cold, unfeeling nature, insisting Damian was better off without such a woman. Genevieve joined in, weeping, accusing me of betraying Damian's love, of abandoning him in his hour of need. My father, his face purple with rage, disowned me, severing all ties. I listened, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Very well," I said, my voice calm, indifferent. I had no illusions about marriage, no romantic fantasies left to shatter. Even with Zhou Mubai's unwavering tenderness, I held back a part of myself, unwilling to fully surrender, afraid of another heartbreak. Love, I had learned, was a fickle, unpredictable force, prone to silent, devastating decay. I wouldn't risk such pain again. But our life together was good. A quiet contentment, a shared understanding. We were kindred spirits, finding joy in each other's presence, even in shared silences, in the quiet companionship of reading side by side. Our wedding, 2 months later, was bathed in sunshine, a gentle breeze rustling through the outdoor venue. A small, intimate gathering, with no elaborate rituals, no forced formality. Damian came. He handed me a small, elegantly wrapped gift box. "Congratulations," he murmured, his voice low, strained. Zhou Mubai, his arm protectively around my waist, accepted the gift with a polite nod of thanks, placing it aside. Damian's gaze lingered on my slightly rounded belly, his eyes darkening with unspoken emotions. The wedding reception was a tapestry of flowers, white lace, every detail carefully chosen, imbued with love and care. Zhou Mubai's elder brother and his family had flown in from overseas. My father, grounded by his legal troubles, was absent. At the ceremony, I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with Professor Zhou, towards my future with Zhou Mubai. During our vows, Zhou Mubai turned to me, his voice thick with emotion. "I have always regretted losing you, Eleanor, from that brief encounter years ago. Fate has been kind to me, granting me a second chance. And I will not fail this time. I will cherish you, protect you, love you unconditionally." He continued, a heartfelt, impromptu speech, nearly 800 words of raw emotion, tears glistening in his eyes. His sincerity was infectious. Soon, I was weeping too. During the reception, as we made our rounds, Zhou Mubai paused, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you tired, Eleanor? Why don't you rest for a while?" "I can handle this." I shook my head, smiling. "Would you deprive everyone of seeing your beautiful bride?" He gently stroked my nose, a playful tenderness in his eyes. "My bride is too beautiful," he murmured, his voice low, intimate. "I want to keep her all to myself." We smiled at each other, a quiet understanding passing between us. I found myself looking forward to a life of quiet contentment, a life like his parents, filled with shared passions, with mutual respect, with enduring love. He would write his medical papers, I would write my literary analyses, and we would build a life together, brick by quiet brick. Our first child was a son. Chaos descended. We had been so certain it would be a girl. We had names chosen, clothes bought, tiny shoes, all in delicate shades of pink. When our son arrived, a robust, healthy boy, we were utterly unprepared. A frantic scramble for blue clothes, for boy names, for everything. Thankfully, Zhou embraced fatherhood with boundless enthusiasm. Professor Ainsworth, while unable to physically assist due to her age, hired 2 experienced nannies, and gradually, amidst the baby's cries and coos, a semblance of order emerged from the delightful chaos. Damian never reappeared in our lives. I heard, through the grapevine, that he had followed his parents' wishes and married a woman from a similarly prominent family. A fiery, assertive woman who, upon entering the Lancaster household, had promptly humiliated Genevieve and driven her away, showing no mercy, no sentimentality. Damian's mother and wife, I heard, were constantly at odds, their battles for dominance echoing through the Lancaster mansion. A different kind of chaos, perhaps, but chaos nonetheless. Our son grew, healthy, energetic, and mischievous. At 3 or 4, he was the perfect little boy, a miniature charmer, his soft arms wrapped around my neck, showering me with kisses, his laughter a constant melody in our home. The pangs of childbirth faded into distant memory, replaced by the boundless joy of motherhood. Then, at 5 or 6, the rebellious phase hit, a whirlwind of boundless energy and mischievous pranks. Even the family dog, our golden retriever, seemed to avoid him at times. If I dared to use the restroom, he would pound on the door, his small voice insistent. "Mommy! Mommy! Open up!" A tiny, adorable terror. One evening, Zhou returned home to find our son perched by the front door, a picture of forlorn abandonment. I overheard Zhou asking, "Where's Mommy?" "Mommy scolded me today," our son declared, his voice a dramatic whisper of wounded innocence. Today's crime? Attempting to pull the golden retriever's tail, then biting its ear. Even for my own son, discipline was necessary. Zhou scooped him up in his arms, and instantly, our son clung to his neck, his small voice rising in a melodramatic tale of parental injustice. "Mommy loves the dog more than me," he wailed, his voice thick with feigned sorrow. "Mommy scolds me when I play with Goldie. Mommy doesn't love her baby anymore." He buried his face against Zhou neck, stealing a glance at me, then quickly burying his face again, sensing my watchful gaze. Zhou chuckled, his voice soothing. "Goldie is your brother, silly boy," he murmured, his voice warm with affection. "You have to play nicely with Goldie. If you're kind to him, Goldie will love you too." "Oh, my silly son, jealous of a dog." Goldie, sensing the shift in attention, began to jump at Zhou legs, vying for affection too. Our son, though prone to dramatic sulks, was quick to forgive. Moments later, he was racing around the house, giggling, Goldie bounding happily at his heels. After bath time, Zhou wrapped him in a soft towel, carrying him, still damp and giggling, into the bedroom. He wriggled out of the towel, diving into bed, snuggling close to me, his small body warm and pliant against mine. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice sleepy. "Story." I kissed his soft cheek, reaching for his favorite fairy tale book, and began to read. Zhou leaned down, kissing both of us, a quiet tenderness in his eyes, before disappearing into the bathroom to shower. Later, when our son was finally asleep, Zhou attempted to carry him back to his own room. But our son stirred, his eyelids fluttering open, his small voice slurred with sleepiness. "No," he mumbled, his eyes still closed. "Want to sleep with Mommy." Zhou rolled his eyes playfully, glancing at me, a mock exasperation in his expression. "He's too clingy," he whispered, his voice amused. "And you," I teased, a smile playing on my lips, "you're jealous of a child." Zhou chuckled, rubbing his nose against mine, his eyes sparkling with warmth. "Just trying to pave the way for a little sister," he murmured, his voice low, intimate, a promise whispered in the quiet of our bedroom.